Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the forum here at the Kennedy School at Harvard. We have a great afternoon for you. We have the distinguished senator, senior senator from New York, Chuck Schumer, who has just written a terrific book, which I'll keep putting up, called Positively American. And we want to talk about that book today, and then, of course, I'm sure we'll end up talking about everything under the sun, this being the forum. But to introduce the senator today, I want to introduce one of our Harvard students, a junior from the college, Ari Rubin. He is from Manhattan, and I'm going to give him the honors of introducing his senator. Go ahead.
Thank you, Professor K-Mark. Senator Schumer, as the former vice president of the IOP Student Advisory Committee and as a proud New Yorker, I'm proud to welcome you to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. Senator, so you know, we are both from New York City. We are both Democrats. We are both Jewish. We both love Chinese food. We both bleed Harvard crimson. We are both supporting your colleague, Senator Clinton's candidacy for president. My grandmother went to James Madison High School. You went several decades later. But there is one way in which we will eternally differ, Senator. I am a lifelong Mets fan, and you are a diehard Yankees fan. Looking past that, ladies and gentlemen, we are in the presence of one of America's great leaders of today. There are two things that I love about Chuck Schumer. The first is that he is a man with a passion for ideas and the ability to translate them into meaningful legislation. It was because of his relentless commitment to fighting crime that he led the fight for the 1993 ban on assault weapons and the 1994 crime bill. As students, we can especially appreciate the senator's relentless commitment to public education at all levels. He led the charge to make college tuition tax deductible. He has developed a Marshall Plan for teachers, which is designed to attract the best and the brightest to teaching. That passion for ideas imbues his book, Positively American, in which he argues that in an era of technological development and innovation and with a changing economy, it is Democrats who must put forth solutions to meet America's challenges. And if the past is any indication, we know that some of the ideas in that book will become legislation. The second thing I love about Senator Schumer is his incomparable political instincts. The senator's triumph over Al D'Amato 8 years ago was the New York equivalent of Odysseus outwitting the Cyclops, or if you prefer, of David beating Goliath. And of course, he was the architect of the Democrats' improbable takeover of the Senate. Senator, on behalf of every Democrat in this great nation and in this room, thank you so much. Now, before I finish my introduction, Senator Schumer, there is one thing I need to give you. Now, several years ago, Senator Schumer came to Harvard, and he, as he recounts in page 7 of his book, tried out for the basketball team, and the audition was not so successful, or the trial was not so successful. Now, of course, and this is a story in his book, and that the president of the Dems told me when I came to Harvard, someone knocked on his door to work for the McCarthy campaign, and the rest was history. Now, Senator, the Harvard basketball team has been about 500 this year, and I hear that they are in need of a power forward to lead their team to victory. So it's my pleasure to present you with this, and maybe another victory is in store for a different team that you will lead. Thank you very much.
That's great, Ari. You did a great job.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Where'd you go to high school? Excellent. Good to see you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you, Ari, and that was a great introduction. You have a great future in political life.
Don't run against me so quickly. The age for Senate is 30, so I have a few years left. But I want to thank you, and I want to thank the Institute of Politics and all of you for coming and showing interest. I am delighted to be here and discuss the ideas in my book, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, and I always like coming back to Harvard. I want to introduce my daughter, Jessica, who is here, who just graduated from the class of '06. And good news for our family, Jessica's younger sister will become member of the class, I guess, of 11. She's coming next year, so I can spend plenty of time here in Cambridge because I love being here. But let me talk a little about the book so we have enough time to hear your questions and your thoughts. I wrote this book really out of passion and out of concern, based on, more than anything else, the view that America is sort of drifting in the wrong direction, and that we as Americans and we as Democrats had a responsibility to take America back. And I believe that the 2008 election is going to be a very important election, a seminal election in certain ways, most likely. Something like 1932, where Franklin Roosevelt established a generation of Democrats, or 1980, where Ronald Reagan established a generation of Republicans. And I believe that the middle class, the big, broad middle class, which largely feels alienated from politics, is up for grabs for the first time. Their parents bought into the Roosevelt Revolution, and they bought into the Reagan Revolution. But the idea now that government should just shrink, get away the minute the federal government moves, chop its fingers off, has lost its vitality to the middle class. Why? Because technology has changed the world. Technology creates terrorism. It allows small groups of bad people to hurt us here in our homeland, and we need to be smart and strong about protecting ourselves. Technology has created one global labor market where our workers compete against workers around the globe, where our kids' schools are in competition with schools in places like India and China and Brazil. It's allowed us to live longer. And that means how do you support yourself? And how do you live well when you have 30 years of retirement? And living longer has created other changes. We get married later, if we get married. We have kids later, if we have kids. So the whole world has changed. And the middle class, for the first time, in 1980, the middle class felt pretty good about their future and their kids' future. But now they're worried. Now they don't feel things are terrible. And politicians, particularly Democrats, who condescend to them, oh, you poor people, we know just how to fix up your problems, don't get anywhere. But on the other hand, they are looking for some help. And I believe the political party leader who can come up with a paradigm, a model, a platform that deals with the anxieties of the middle class can well be the party for a generation. And that's what I attempt to do in the book, Positively American. The subtitle is Winning Back a Middle Class Majority, One Family at a Time. I do not wish to supplant basic democratic ideas, but rather add to them. Because basically we ignore the middle class as Democrats too often in too many ways. The first part of the book talks about a fictional couple, Joe and Eileen Bailey. They're fictional in that they're not real. They're sort of a composite of the people I grew up with, campaigned for and with, and represent. And so they're very real to me. If you ask my staff, I've been talking about and talking to the Baileys for 15 years. I have conversations with them. One of my staffers once said I had imaginary friends to the press. Got me in some trouble. But these people are real, and I respect them, and I really love them, and I care about them. And talking to the Baileys, first part of the book, is what helped me beat D'Amato, what helped me get a record vote in New York State in 2004, 71%, where 40% of the people who voted for George Bush then took the affirmative act of crossing the line and voting for me, and helped me guide us to take back the Senate, where I chose candidates who were like the Baileys, could talk to the Baileys, and had platforms that would appeal to the Baileys of their state. I'll just tell you a little bit about the Baileys. There's about a 5-page description in the book. He's an insurance adjuster, makes about $50,000. She works in a medical office, makes about $20,000. They have 3 kids in the public schools. They are very good people. You'd like them to be your neighbors and your friends. And they do feel they vote. They voted for Reagan, for Clinton, for Bush, and for Democrats this time. They're your typical swing voters. And I want to tell you a few things about them, just little bits so you understand them. They are pro-choice. They understand that a fundamental decision like that should be made by the individual, but they're glad their church isn't, because they're worried that the superego of society is coming off. They really dislike the Enron executives who stole money, but they hate the people who burn the flag even more, because the Enron executive represents an excess of something they're basically supportive of, which is go have an idea, form a company, hire people, get rich. The people who burn the flag, they feel, are desecrating what they stand for, and in fact think they're hypocrites, because they use the very freedom that we all have to step on it. And most fundamentally, and this is very important for Democrats to understand, for Americans to understand, but particularly Democrats, they are fundamentally in their veins and bones both capitalists and Democrats, small d. They believe in both systems. And both systems are founded on self-interest. In other words, democracy. Vote what's good for you. And if everyone is allowed to vote what's good for them, the common good will be advanced. Capitalism. Go make money. Do something good for yourself. And if everyone does that, the economy will grow and society will gain. So they think there's nothing wrong with helping yourself. And when Democrats, particularly on the far left, or the New York Times editorial board thinks it's bad to be self-interested, they don't understand that. They're good people. They work hard for their church. They give a high percentage of their income to charity. But they think there's nothing wrong with helping yourself. So the first part of the book traces, as I said, the Baileys, who they are, how they're important, talks about how the Republican Party has drifted away from the Baileys and how we can fill the void. The second part of the book are 11 goals we promise the Baileys we will achieve or attempt to achieve in 10 years. They are each concrete goals, and each one makes a good thing better by 50% or a bad thing worse by 50%. Some people have called it a gimmick. The reviews have been very good of the book, but that's been one of the criticisms. I don't think it's a gimmick. The Baileys understand. If you said one of the goals, for instance, is reduce cancer deaths by 50%. If you said reduce them by 100%, they know we were full of it. And 50% is a number. The Baileys are skeptical of politics. They want to believe, but they've been burnt again and again. And so they want something concrete that they can hold you to. So if you said better health care, they say that's political bull. You say reduce cancer deaths by 50%, reduce childhood obesity by 50%, which are two of the goals. They say, okay, that's something we can check out. The book talks about these 11 goals, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, and maybe in our conversation we will. You'll agree with some, you'll disagree with others, but they're all things the Baileys care about and would make their lives a little better and easier. And it also talks about how the Republicans in 2004, the last presidential election, did have a platform and a vision. 8 words. The Republicans ran on 8 words. War in Iraq, cut taxes, no gay marriage. Now, I don't agree with those broad shibboleths, but I admire the Republican Party for doing it. They had showed some courage. George Bush showed some courage. He took a real issue, he risked his political capital on it, and each issue was tied to a value. So it wasn't, again, something amorphous. War in Iraq, that's a real policy. No gay marriage, that's a real policy. Cut taxes, that's a real policy, each tied to a value. War in Iraq, strong foreign policy. Cut taxes, shrink government. No gay marriage, family values. And then our book asks, what are our 8 words? Well, you try to think of them. You can't. I can't anyway. And now we have a website, and we've gotten over 1,000 people who have sent in their 8 words. And just a couple of, talk about this in the book, but just a couple of things. They don't want bull. So some people say peace should be one of the 8 words. The Baileys say, what do you mean by that? Or better health care, or better schools. Nothing. Now, end global warming, that's a real policy. But the Baileys don't really care that much about that. It's not one of the things that matters. They do care about energy, you'll see in the book, but that's because gas prices have gone up. So what are our 8 words? The best 3 I've heard are national health care. Those should probably be 3 of our 8 words. It's a real policy. Here's the problem on that one. We have to have a plan. We have to have specifics. What is our national health care plan? We don't have one. And no one, forget a consensus, no one has come up with a plan that's even achieved a critical mass. So instead, since I don't think we're there yet for our 8 words, which is very hard to do, and it took the Republicans 30 years, I choose these 11 goals, and I'm going to tell you, do I have time? You tell me, okay. So one of them, for instance, is to raise reading and math scores in our K through 12 schools by 50%. Now, how do you do that? We propose a voluntary nationalization of the school system. Our schools stink. They're getting worse. They don't stink. That's too strong. They will if we do nothing. We are now 12th to 15th of the 23 developed nations in ranking our K through 12 schools. How are we going to stay number 1? How's America's pie going to grow? This is the greatest area that the federal government neglects, because if education stays poor, we won't have the wealth to make better health care, a stronger military, or anything else anybody wants. So we propose a massive spending outlay in the schools, and we propose that school districts can voluntarily opt in, and we think about 80% will. By the way, we think that, I'm going to get into too much detail here, I love talking about this stuff. We think there's too much focus on the top 10% of schools, which are doing fine, and the bottom 10%, where the problems are much deeper than education. A crack-addicted mother sends a 6-year-old child to school. A good school isn't going to solve those problems for most of those children. You need to do other things, we should. But we focus on the schools from the 20th to the 80th percentile, which are the ones declining the most quickly. And any school district can opt into the following plan. They have to do 4 things are part of the plan. 1, they'll get a huge federal increase in dollars, $3,000 a kid. Now, if you're Lake Forest, $3,000 may not mean that much if you're spending $18,000 a kid, but if you're Massapequa and you're spending $7,000 or $8,000 a kid, it matters. In return, you have to meet 1 federal standard for kids and for teachers. Not this No Child Left Behind, which has 40 different standards and the state standards, but you got to meet a rigid standard. You get this money, and over 4 years, if you don't meet the standard, federal experts come in and direct your school as to what to do. Okay? The third part of the plan is you have to differentiate pay among teachers. We propose a plan where math and science teachers, which are far and away 3% of all math teachers last year, new math teachers, had any background in math. We propose the federal government, in addition to the money we give the schools, $3,000 a student, will supplement the salaries of math and science teachers, $20,000 a year, if the math teacher passes 2 tests. One, a knowledge test that they actually know math, which most teachers don't, new ones, and second, that they're pedagogically good. And we got one of the 2 big educational unions to agree to our plan, which has never happened, because the general union view is pay a gym teacher and a math teacher the same thing, and don't do a test. Well, we're doing both. And the 4th thing we have to do, which leads to the second goal, is you have to freeze the property tax for 10 years. The property tax is the tax the middle class hates. It is too high for most people. That's why school budgets get rejected in increasing percentages. It was a historical anomaly that schools are tied to the property tax, and we ought to lift it. And that's why 80% of all school districts will vote for this plan, because most of the people who don't have kids in the schools will vote yes simply because they want their property tax frozen. And there's another benefit to this. We Democrats should free ourselves from the handcuffs of saying the only way we can help the middle class with their tax burden is the income tax, because when you reduce taxes on a middle class person by $50, you have to reduce them on a high income person by $50,000. We can become a cut taxes or lower taxes party by freezing the property tax and then raising the highest levels of the income tax should we need to. I'm not sure we will, or the book describes the way we'll actually do it, and free ourselves of the manacle of tax cuts and get the revenues we need to form the government. The third one is increase the number of kids who go to college by 50%. I'm going to skip over that. But the problem in college is different than K through 12. Our colleges are excellent. They're still rated in the top 5 of the 23 OECD nations. Just hard to pay for them. We make it easy for the middle class to pay. And I'm going to go, the 4th is the Baileys are not anti-immigration, but they are anti-illegal immigration. And we propose a system using a national employment card, which everyone would have to have, and it has an indelible chip in it, an unforgeable chip that matches the retina of your eye, to greatly decrease illegal immigration, because every employer would have to swipe the card before they hire you, me, and any legal immigrant. But if they hire somebody who doesn't get the card swiped, which is hooked into a computer, and says they're legal, they'll get a $50,000 fine the first time, and they'll go to jail the second time. And you'll cut down illegal immigration by 80 or 90%, and then we should raise legal immigration. And this is controversial, but we say 70% of our immigrants shouldn't be poor people from one country, which is what happens now, because we have a border with Mexico, and those are the people, I don't blame them, who cross the border. Our immigration should be rational and diverse. It should take people from all over the globe legally, and take people particularly in jobs that we need, whether it be a high-density physics engineer or somebody to pick the apple crop in Ontario County. So those are some of these. I'm going to go over the others and we can talk about them, but I'll just tell you what the others are. Reduce our dependence on fossil fuels by 50%. We have a novel and interesting way to do that. Reduce cancer deaths by 50%, because I don't think we're ready for a national health care plan. This is the best thing we can do now. Reduce abortions by 50%. Reduce childhood obesity by 50%. Reduce the amount of pornography kids can get on the net by 50%, which really bothers the Baileys. Raise the amount of tax compliance by 50%. Upper income people, the biggest tax cut George Bush has given is not by lowering the rate, but by removing all auditing, so that you're less likely to be audited if you make $1 million during the Bush administration for much of it than if you make $25,000. And finally, increase terrorism, increase the effectiveness by which we fight terrorism by 50%, where we propose a strong foreign policy, but to focus on terrorism, which could hurt us, rather than fighting these wars against countries, Islamofascism, and simply we shouldn't be using troops even to do good things like bring democracy to the world. The only thing we should be using our military for is what happened in Afghanistan. And we propose a multilateral way where we change the rules of the world, where if you're a country, by design or not, that's harboring terrorists, a multilateral force can go in, take them out, and leave. And you have to change the way our military operates and the rules of diplomacy to do it. But the Baileys are no longer wedded to the George Bush Republican philosophy because Iraq is such a failure, but make no mistake about it, they want somebody who's going to defend them and not blame America for the problems in the world and the problems of terrorism. And if we don't do that, we won't capture a majority. So that's the book. I don't expect you to agree with all of it, but here's the purpose of the book, more than anything else. We don't have any discussion on what our vision is, what our platform is. We have broad democratic values, which we all believe in, an active government, helping those who need help. And to translate those into a vision and a platform is really hard. Why did I write the book? I mean, what was the moment where I decided to write the book? I'll conclude with this. I sat as one of the Democratic leaders. Every week we would meet to decide what our platform should be in '06, and one of the agreements was reduce foreign oil imports by 50%. So I raised my hand and I said, well, the first thing we should do is raise CAFE standards, mileage standards. And they said, you can't do that. The Michigan delegation would be against it. So they said, okay, take that out. We were lucky that in 2006, no one discovered that our energy independence platform as Democrats did not touch CAFE standards. But I was distraught after this meeting. I said, how are we going to create a platform and a vision if something simple like that happens? And then I tried to think, how did Newt Gingrich do his contract with America? And in my mind's eye, I had always thought he had aimed it at the Democrats. And when I went back and thought about it, no. When Gingrich did this, he was a solitary backbencher. And his contract with America was more aimed at Bob Michel, who was the Republican leader, than at Bill Clinton or Tom Foley, the Democratic leader. And so I first decided then, if you do it by consensus, you get small bore ideas that worked in '06, by the way, because we had George Bush. 75% of this election was a referendum against George Bush. But in 2008, we're not going to have George Bush to kick around. And I believe this. I believe that while the press always focuses on the personalities in the horse race, that if Democrats don't have a platform, if Democrats don't have a vision, we're going to lose. The Republicans have one. Remember those 8 words? It's wrong for 2008, but people will vote for a platform that's wrong rather than none. So the purpose of this book is not to say these 11 ideas are the Holy Grail, but to get us to start thinking and discussing where we're going as a party, what we believe in, not in terms of just broad values, which we know, but in terms of specific, large, and concrete ideas. We call our 11 ideas ambitious but attainable. And I hope you'll have better ones. And I hope you'll go on our website. I hope you'll read the book, go on our website, and tell us either what your 8 words are or what your view is as to how, as Democrats, but much more importantly as Americans, we can make our government work for the brave new world in which we live in this 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Schumer. And of course, with your conclusion, you stole my first question. Because the thing that struck me from the book was the anecdote about the CAFE standards. It brings up a sort of larger question that I'd like you to address, if you would. There's a lot of feeling among grassroots Democrats that the party in Washington is a party with no courage. And
With no
courage.
courage.
Beginning with the Iraq War vote and throughout the last 4 or 5 years, there's a sense that Democrats in Washington are too enamored with holding on to power and not interested in strong ideas, in tough ideas, and that consequently we have to wait until the party in power really screws up, like they have with this war, for us to get an electoral break. What do you think's going on there? What do you think's happening with your colleagues?
Okay, let me say a couple of things here. First, I tend to be hawkish, more hawkish probably than many of you in this room, but I'm a vehement opponent of what is going on in Iraq. And I always believe you give the president, the commander-in-chief, the benefit of the doubt when the nation is attacked. If every senator and congressman said, I'm only voting for the plan I think is exactly right, we'd have 535 plans, each with one vote. And we'd end up with our hands tied in a very dangerous world, where I believe there will be another terrorist attack, most likely in the next 10 years or so. It's just, if you look at the big tectonic plates that move, it's there. So, but here's what I think. I think George Bush has so screwed up this Iraq war, and the surge is such a dumb policy with no change in strategy or focus behind it, that he is going to be forced by his fellow Republicans as we get closer to 2008 to withdraw troops. And I think it's a likelihood, not a certainty, that by November of 2008, more than half the troops will be out of Iraq and on their way down. I think basically we Democrats and the nation, because of his failures, will succeed in forcing him to change the strategy from policing a civil war between Shiites and Sunnis to rather focusing on anti-terrorism, which is al-Qaeda camps that might be in Anbar province, which would maybe require 30 or 40,000 troops out of harm's way who could just go in, deal with those camps, and go back. So I don't think the Iraq war is going to be there for 2008. I just want to say that. Why don't Democrats come up? I've asked myself this question. One of the real problems, and one of the best parts, my favorite parts of this book, is the chapter on energy which talks about interest groups. Interest groups are still out there, strong as could be, even though they no longer represent Joe and Eileen's interests very much, and that's one of the reasons. My little epiphany, I want to tell 2 stories about this. I got to Congress in 1980 in the Reagan landslide, 7 new Congress members, right? 6 Republicans and me from New York State. And within about 3 months, I realized why Reagan had won. Crime was ripping apart my district, ripping it apart. People who worked hard, they lost their cars, they lost the value of their homes, they were afraid to go out. I experienced it myself. I would have to put on my jeans every morning and run downstairs to see if my car was still there during a couple of months where we had a rash of car thefts. So I get to Washington, and I get on the crime subcommittee because I want to do something, and guess who is actually writing crime legislation? The ACLU. They were writing it. They should be at the table. Civil liberties is one of the values you want in a crime, when you deal with crime, but it's not the only value. And the ACLU basically had a view, this is their view, God bless them for it, that you let 1,000 guilty people go free lest you convict one innocent person. It's a balance in the criminal justice system because it's imperfect. And that was so out of touch with the average American's view, with Joe and Eileen Bailey's view, with what was happening in my district. It hit me. That's why Reagan got elected. Democrats had forgotten what was happening and listened just to the interest group. And that's what happens. If you go against the interest group, okay, I'm going to tell another one, because I think interest group politics, interest groups on the left have hurt us It's easy to be against the interest groups on the right, and they're worse, because they're greedy and nasty. And, you know, I can't stand them. I fight them tooth and nail, but that's easy. What's hard for a Democrat is to resist the interest group on the left. So I came up with a plan, it's in the book, about how do we get gas prices down and reduce consumption and deal with the energy crisis. In the long run, we have to wean ourselves from fossil fuels, and we have a very novel suggestion where we set up an independent agency, experts, non-political, who figure out the best way within 10 years to greatly reduce fossil fuels, and then they present their whole plan, and Congress gets one vote, yes or no. They choose nuclear, you got a yes or no. It'll be a combination, but if you let it go into Congress, nothing will happen. Nothing, because the congressman from Oklahoma will want what's good for Oklahoma, and ethanol will be the answer because it's good for the Iowa corn growers, and becomes a mess, special interest politics. But until we get to that point, that's that's starting in year 3. I propose this. This is the point I want to make. That we made a trade-off with the Republicans. And we said, if you get us 10 votes to double CAFE standards, we'll get you 10 votes to drill in the East Gulf. We don't drill in the East Gulf. It's the largest supply of untapped oil and gas. The environmental groups are very much against it, and Florida's against it. Why are the environmental groups against it? Florida's against it, by the way, because it's a big political issue and everyone's afraid there'll be an oil spill, gigantic oil spill on the coast of Florida. And if you're a presidential candidate, you see how many of them this year are for drilling in the East Gulf. None of them will be, because they don't want to lose Florida.
Right.
And none of them will be for raising CAFE standards, because they don't want to lose Michigan. And all of them will be for a huge amount of ethanol, which is energy inefficient, because they want to win Iowa. But, so I proposed this compromise. And I called in the environmental groups, and I get high environmental ratings. They like me, because I'm an environmentalist. And I said, what's wrong with drilling in the East Gulf? Oh, it's terrible. I said, well, what has bad happened by drilling in the West Gulf? And they had no answer. You know, some fish was hurt somewhere or other, but it really, seriously, there was no big oil spill, nothing. So, now, when I as a senator propose this, guess what's going to happen? My friends, the environmental lobby, will send out something that Schumer is anti-environmental. And some of you who are part of the Sierra Club or Friends of the Earth will start thinking, what the hell is wrong with Schumer?
Exactly.
Okay? And so it's not in Schumer's interest to propose this, even though I'm trying to advance the cause of the environment. And what the interest group is doing is what they should do. If you're the Sierra Club, your goal is a pure environment. And when you actually talk to them about drilling in the East Gulf, you know what they'll say? We're not against it. But if we let you drill in the East Gulf, you'll soon drill in the oceans, Atlantic and Pacific, which have greater problems. It's the nose in the camel's tent. What is it called?
Nose under the camel's tent.
Nose in the camel's tent argument. Camel's nose in the tent argument.
We're having trouble up here.
Okay, right. And so if you're a politician who's interested in getting reelected, you know what? It's not in your interest to propose this. Now, I could spend all my time and energy going to the 400 chapters of the Sierra Club in New York State and explaining to them why my plan is right. And I'll never get their mailing list, so I can't write them an answer. And so you lose. And the problem is, interest groups have far too much sway, left, right, and center. And they pull us away and make it not in our self-interest to do what's in the national interest.
Well said.
And it's got to be the politicians' courage
Yeah.
to say, now, I got 71%. And I didn't get the 71%. This is to do school uniforms. No offense to Bill Clinton. Okay? And I'm willing to take it on the chin a little bit here and there. But if I got 52%, I'd have to risk my whole career for it. And the system shouldn't be set up so you risk your career to do the right thing.
We have many students, and I want to ask you about the Congress, but I'm going to defer for a minute and go to the students because there's so many. So let's start right over here.
Shabbat
And
Shalom.
say where you're from, too, please.
Shabbat Shalom, Senator. My name is Ari Cole, and I'm one of the Kennedy students in the mid-career program. I have a short statement and a question. I'd like to also agree with my Harvard colleague, Ari, that your brilliant leadership and thorough discussion in detail on both sides of the issues over the many years has been enlightening and very edifying. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Ari.
My question is, it has to do with the upcoming presidential race. There's, in my opinion, political correctness that's gone too far. When I call you articulate, brilliant, absolutely wonderful, and one of the most fantastic senators in the world, I hope you don't interpret that as being mean.
No, I didn't.
Because I mean it from my heart. And I think that some groups, including some groups that I'm in, can sometimes be hypersensitive and also want political correctness. My question to you, Senator, is what level of political correctness, when it's a compliment, probably heartfelt from a very good person, is
Right.
taken way out of context? Maybe I'm wrong about this.
Okay, this is a great question. And I just didn't make my concluding point. You know, coming here makes me think I didn't make I made all the other ones in the book, but I didn't make this one. The middle class feels left out because they're not part of any of these interest groups. Joe and Eileen Bailey want a good environment, but they also want jobs. They want civil liberties, but they also want safety. And they're left out because if you just listen to the interest group, you're only getting one perspective, and the average person, should be like the average senator. We should be mediating for the average person. But the average person, Joe and Eileen, they're busy. They have their jobs, they have their kids, they have the joys and sorrows of life. So they don't have the time, but the Sierra Club does. And so it's a shorthand way, and I like the Sierra Club, and they're very nice to me, so I'm not picking on them, just using them. But it's a shorthand way. It would be nice if the interest groups would do a little mediating. But you know what? The ones don't. And then there's one other problem which you bring up. The media these days is very detrimental because they love conflict. So instead of when Joe Biden, which is what you're referring to,
I'm not mentioning any names.
I know. But instead of him, and he is a good person, and no one really thinks I don't know a single person who thinks he's a racist or a bigot in any way. But when he says what he did, it's in the media's interest to sensationalize, sell papers, and heat it all up. And frankly, you know, you don't know where the buck stops. It probably makes it more interesting, so you might buy the newspaper that day, whereas you wouldn't if they had sort of a balanced and even-handed discussion of it all. And one of the things we do talk about in the book is how capitalism has almost become too perfect. It's like the movie 2001, you should see it. I don't know if people watch it anymore. But it was about how machines became too important, you know, have become so perfect that they dominate us. So capitalism knows how to excite our desires, whether it's the media or McDonald's. Why are we more obese? Because capitalism has figured out exactly what we really want to eat, put the desire in our head, and put it there for us. And what we propose, by the way, to reduce childhood obesity, because I believe the government can be the superego in terms of exhorting to generally accepted norms. So we propose a tax on all fast food advertising to be used for counter-advertising on kids' programs. You eat these French fries, here's what could happen to you.
Not a bad idea. Thank you. Let's go up here to the balcony, yes. And say where you're from, too.
Hi, I'm Will Rubin. I'm a freshman at the college from New York City. Thanks for...
Where in New York City are you from?
East End, Upper East Side.
What? Upper East Side.
Upper East Side of Manhattan. You've talked a fair bit about your plan for energy independence, decreasing by 50% our dependence on fossil fuels. And I know that that's been a popular subject these days, especially during the election. I'm wondering about your specific that you propose in the book, creating the independent commission. I know that to some that may seem like you're just purporting a commission and not perhaps some specifics. So I'm wondering, with all these specifics that we're hearing today, what would you hope the commission would come forward for with in terms of recommendations?
Yeah, okay, let me just say this. What we propose is a group called NEEDA, N-E-E-D-A, and I forgot what it stands for, but it's in the book. Daniel Squadron, who is a great guy who wrote this book with me, I would sit on my couch, tell him my ideas and my experiences, and he wove it into an amazingly readable book. He came up with the idea, NEEDA. That's, I guess, why I don't remember it. But in any case, what we do is we propose a panel of experts who have real power, and they propose the best way to wean us from fossil fuels, because it's real. And it's not just real about global warming, although that's serious and real. We're spending we're a giant, and we're bleeding at the wrist. Every day we send $1 billion out of this country and give it to people we don't like. Chavez, the head of Iran, Putin. How dumb. And you see, I just want to say something. We don't propose a gas tax, which is what the New York Times editorial page would. Joe and Eileen Bailey, they don't agree with the environmentalists who say the way to get a better environment is to slow down our growth. They want to keep growing. They just want us to be more efficient. So they want to grow with less energy rather than shrink. And you got to understand that, or you're never going to achieve environmental, they hear on the right-wing talk radio. They're not right-wingers, but they listen occasionally. You know how Barbara Streisand, the great environmentalist, flies in her jet plane and uses more fuel in one trip than they would use in 10 years in their car. And they say, who is she kidding? They don't want Barbara Streisand to stop flying her plane, but they want to make the plane more efficient.
Exactly.
And so the commission, I don't know the exact right answer. And there are so many interrelated parts. Let's say they propose cellulitic ethanol. Cellulitic, not the corn, which is bunk. You still have to have the gas stations supply it, or no one's going to build it. It's all interconnected. And so you need this great group of thinkers to come up with the idea, and it'll be a group of ideas. And then you need Congress to put its fanny on the line and say yes or no, I'm for reducing dependence or not. I can tell you my ideas. I have some that I think are better than others, but it's irrelevant. Because if I say I'm only voting for my ideas, it's just like we're not going to get anything done. So we're going to have to surrender because we've been unable to do it ourselves. Every energy bill we have is a hodgepodge of special interests that does nothing.
Perfect. Right over here.
Hi, my name's Daniel Yule. I'm with LaRouche's Political Action Committee.
With where?
LaRouche's Political Action Committee.
Okay.
My question is about Iran, China, and Russia. China has recently exposed that they've developed laser-guided systems to shoot down satellites and missiles in space. And if Russia and China explode any satellites in space, it can cause so much radiation to jam up any type of control over space. And it's well known, if you were to, while you're launching war.
What's the question? Let's get to the question.
It's coming. If you're launching war against Iran, you're going to need that type of control over space. Right? So do you think that Russia and China are just going to sit by if there's a military confrontation with Iran?
Thank you.
Well, here's what I think. If there's a military confrontation, the Russians and the Chinese are playing footsie with the Iranians, no question about it, for economic interest. But one of the problems we've had, the best solution to deal with Iran is an economic boycott. But when you have a foreign policy that is so macho and says, you just listen to us, we don't need you for anything, you're not going to be able to create the kind of multilateral agreements that we need, the multilateral action that we need. So I don't frankly believe we'll get anything done until George Bush leaves. He has so poisoned the well. Foreign people are so much against him that you need to try again. The idea is, we write in the book, in the foreign policy point, I was brought up in Brooklyn. If you're the strongest guy on the block, you can behave one of two ways. You can either try to be a real leader, help those who need a little help, bring everybody in, share the power and all that, and you'll be a great leader. And if some guys from the other block try to gang up on you, people will help you. Or you can be sort of saying, I'm doing it all for myself, and just go at it alone, and the heck with all of you, and sort of be nasty and condescending. And then three of the next group is going to jump you at some point, and no one's going to defend you. We got to be more like the first person. I mean,
No doubt about it.
it's a policy that has failed us. So you're not going to get anywhere with Iran unless you have some kind. Military action, unilateral military action, will be very, very bad for the United States. And we shouldn't have to have the choice come down to that or a nuclear Iran.
Thank you. Let's go over here.
Yeah, I think many in the Senate and the House do understand that, but are still unwilling to impeach Cheney. Now, I have a question.
Can you
My name
give
is
your
Jer-
name and
yeah,
where
sure.
you're from,
My name
please?
is Jerry Duran. I'm a committed FDR Democrat, and for that reason, I work with the LaRouche Youth Movement. And my question is on globalization specifically, because what you have in Congress, and I have a lot of experience and work in the U.S. Congress, what you have right now is a policy discussion that's going to decide whether or not we're going to be able to support 6 billion people on this planet. And what you have coming from...
Can we get to the question?
Yeah.
please?
Now, you have a phenomenon in Congress, it's biofoolery.
What? I couldn't hear.
I said you have a phenomenon in Congress, it's known as biofoolery, in which the issue of the future of civilization is left out of the policy discussion, particularly on energy, but more so on infrastructure and international relations.
Okay,
Now-
let me just
so
cut
let's,
you
yeah,
off.
let's talk about
Look,
that.
I think I write about this a little in the book. The Baileys sort of understand in their gut, they don't follow the details. It's not in their self-interest to do it, that we're one world now. And a policy where we have to surrender certain autonomy and independence to work with the other countries of the world, whether it be to fight terrorism, to deal with different diseases, whether it be AIDS or avian flu. They sort of understand that. So this is one of the reasons things are different. In 1980, U.S. could do it alone. Let's show strength. The heck with dealing with these other countries, because it's a pain in the neck to deal with some of them. But I think they understand we have to do that now, and they're waiting for a paradigm. They're waiting for a model.
Right. Right over here. Yes,
But
thank
not
you.
one that reflects weakness.
Yeah.
Yes,
Go
no,
ahead.
we're going to go to the next question.
We're going to go to
sir.
the next question now.
Hi, my name is Noah Silver. I'm from Westchester County, New York. Thank you for speaking tonight, Senator. In discussing the 15% value, you talked about the Bailey's skepticism. I think we've definitely seen the results of that skepticism in the midterm elections, with a lot of the campaign ads being very issues-based and policy-oriented, at least the victorious ones. I was wondering how much of that skepticism would you attribute to issues of competency, like Iraq, and how much would you attribute to issues of scandal, like the Foley scandal?
I think, look, I haven't broken it down that way. I do think the majority, if you had to break down why we won, I mean, we did all the right things. And had we not, even with George Bush's mistakes and the Republican Congresses and the mistakes, we wouldn't have taken back the Senate, maybe the House. The Senate was sort of harder. So getting good candidates and raising the money and having good strategies mattered. But make no mistake about it, had George Bush done things right, we wouldn't have taken back the Senate. Had he even done things a little less wrong. The Republican senators right now are furious at him because he didn't fire Rumsfeld before the election. They believe they'd still be in the majority if he simply did that. And what we've seen is, with Rumsfeld gone, they're still pursuing the same dumb policies that they pursued when he was there. So he had nothing to do with it. So I guess what I would say is certainly the election was a referendum against George Bush. They had to feel Democrats. What they've done is they've given Democrats a chance, but they haven't come close to closing the deal with Democrats. And the 6 for '06 ideas that we had are hardly enough to win in 2008 and hardly enough to create a new generation of Democrats, even though they did resonate in the context of not liking George Bush, that we stood for something that people would agree with.
Terrific. I want to take a short minute to interject a little note of congratulations to Senator Schumer. One of the things he did do in '06 was he recruited very good Senate candidates.
Right.
And sometimes against his own political interests. The last time I was with the senator, I watched him explain to a group of New York feminist women why he had recruited Bob Casey to run for Senate in Pennsylvania. Some of his own constituents weren't exactly pleased with the fact that he had recruited someone who was not pro-choice. And I think it's a mark of the kind of courage he's advocating in this book, that he did that knowing it was the right political decision, it was the right decision for Pennsylvania, and he took a little heat for it, but in the end, he was absolutely right. Let's go up here.
Yeah, I'll just say this quickly. Casey was not pro-choice. I'm strongly pro-choice. Electing him to the Senate made the Senate more pro-choice. That's sort of the complicated reasoning here.
That's right.
And the feminists who Elaine saw me with, who sent me, I got 10,000 emails within an hour of endorsing Casey saying, this was NARAL's Person of the year before, saying you're throwing women overboard. And they mistook one thing. We didn't pick Casey because he was pro-life. Right. He was the best candidate, and we weren't going to let 28 boxes that each candidate had to check off stand in our way of getting the best candidate. And I have to say this, by and large, because Democrats wanted to finally win, most people understood that choice. Even Kate Michelman, who a good friend of mine, endorsed Casey, to her credit.
To her credit, absolutely.
Yep.
Let's go up here.
Thank you. Good evening. My name's Rupert Simons. I'm a Kennedy School student. I'm not an American, but I like what you say, and I hope it wins you some elections.
So far, so good.
Yeah. So particularly encouraging to hear what you say about fossil fuels, which is great. You know, the rest of the world's been saying this for 15 years. What I'm still sort of what I don't understand about American politics as a foreigner is how much money you need to get elected. And every year it's more, and you have winning Senate candidates who actually retain surpluses from their campaign funds, able to build that up and use it for running for president, right? You see what I'm saying? If Eileen and, what's his name, Neil Bailey, look at the Democrats, they'll probably say, okay, these guys are starting to sound more like normal people. But frankly, the amount of money they need to get elected means either they're not normal people at all, they're super rich, or they've made so many compromises with special interests, I can't trust them any more than the other guys.
Right, and they don't, and it's one of the reasons they don't. Not just the act of it happening, but it results in the special interests having greater influence than the Baileys. The only reason I bring up environmental or ACLU is because most Democrats, it's easy for them to see Exxon being a special interest, but not the environment, you know, the Sierra Club or the ACLU, who are also special interests focusing on one issue, even though we agree with them much more than we'd agree with ExxonMobil. There's an anomaly here. We should get rid of money in politics. And there's one damn anomaly that ought to change. I didn't write this in the book. It's not one of the 11 things to appeal to the Baileys. And it's one of the dumbest Supreme Court decisions ever rendered, called Buckley v. Vallejo, which says that you have a First Amendment right, if you're a multimillionaire, to spend your money to put on the same commercial talking about how great you are 6,811 times. It's an idiotic decision. But once a millionaire can spend all his or her money, then you can't limit the amount of funds for everybody else, or you'll have even more millionaires in politics. And one of the things I think we ought to do, I hope the Supreme Court revisits the issue, although you have the ideologues of the left and right. Scalia and Brennan were both for this, because one, or Hugo Black, I guess he wasn't there then, I don't remember, but each one said free speech above all. Free speech is a great thing, but it's not absolute. And we say you can't scream fire, falsely scream fire in a crowded theater, and we say you can't libel somebody, and we say, you know, that pornography has its limits. Well, then why the heck does money, which corrodes our politics, the wellspring of our democracy, why does that get an absolute pass when it comes to a millionaire? If that decision changed, we could then legislate and put dramatic limits. Because just putting public financing there doesn't work, because you can always raise more money in the private sector, and that's what both Clinton, Edwards, and Obama have said, and I think McCain has not said yet what he's going to do, have said they're going to do this year.
Good luck.
Okay, over here. Please, your name and where you're from, please.
Sure. My name is Eric Maltzer. I'm a second-year master's student here at the Kennedy School and not in any way affiliated with Lyndon LaRouche. So I just wanted to ask you, you spoke a little bit about...
Now you see, here's an example of our politics. Probably the percentage of people from Lyndon LaRouche in this audience is probably 3%, but they're the most active ones, so they're getting half the speaking time. And this is how it works. The primaries, I just want to make this point, I don't mean to. The primaries pull people away from the middle. Why? If this is the electorate, you can all see this, it's just a pen. And rough cut, the third who are most liberal are Democrats, and they're to the left side, and the third who are most conservative are Republicans, and they're to the right side, and the third who are the moderates are in the middle. You know who votes in the Democratic primary? The third of the third to the most left, and the third of the third to the most right. So you have the 10% on the left side, most left side, doing the Democratic primary, and you have the third to the right on the Republican, and the parties end up spreading too far away, and oftentimes it's not just left-right, it's the kind of special interests on each side I'm talking about. Now, what's the antidote to that? It's all the other people voting. It's all of you lining up so the LaRouches are 1 out of 100, not 1 out of 2. But it just doesn't happen that way, and you can't blame people who care a lot and who are active for being active.
The senator.
Go ahead. I didn't.
Excuse us. The senator had what we in the profession just call a teaching moment.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Well, that actually is sort of my question. Is I'm from Florida, and we have a mix of very, very different interests. And in New York, you have the same sort of giant melting pot, and both you and Senator Clinton have taken more centrist positions. And you spoke about going against some of the people in your constituency. Congressmen don't have as much leeway to do that, but senators do with such big constituencies.
And the Senate is a somewhat more centrist body than the House.
Why aren't there more centrist senators, and why aren't there more centrist policies coming from the Senate?
I think for the reasons I mentioned, which is that the most active people, particularly in the primaries, tend to be at the more extreme, or tend to be single-issue voters. You know, the NRA is a small organization, but has huge power in many states because they have a whole lot of single-interest voters, and politicians are good at figuring out what does that. And one other point here, part of all this is the success of America. If people were really upset, if the Baileys really were in bad shape, they'd be standing at the microphone. They'd be knocking on doors in the primary. But they're not. We've basically had 50 years of success. Here's the problem. We're not going to have the same years of success unless we change course. But most people don't look at things 10 years down the road, whether it's global warming and the environment, or our failing school system, which is still okay, or the fact that our immigration policies are out of control. So nobody looks down the road 10 years, and things move so fast. When you don't, we have trouble. So if we were back in 1932, the 21st century version of 1932, you wouldn't be asking that question.
Over here.
My name is Ben Bolger, and I'm a student in the Graduate School of Design at Harvard. And I grew up around Flint, Michigan. And as you recall from the film Roger and Me, General Motors moved out a long time ago, and really the city is yet to come together. And that's kind of a metaphor for a lot of the Midwest, where people tend to leave the Midwest and go elsewhere. What specifically do you think we can do as Democrats to revitalize the Midwest? Beyond education, kind of the other formulas, how can we revitalize because I think the middle class oftentimes are very nervous about the jobs they do have in that area.
Yes. And look, I know what you're going through because Buffalo, New York and Rochester, New York are not terribly different than Michigan or all of that. New York's, as the previous gentleman said, is an amazingly diverse state. We got the booming part of New York City, and then we have upstate. And let me tell you how Albany turned itself around. It decided to focus on a couple of growing industries. It focused not only its educational activities. Albany, the capital region, is growing job-wise faster than the national average, which it wasn't. But they decided they were going to get a chip fab plant, they were going to do chip technology and become sort of the third center after Silicon Valley and Austin, and it worked, and it created other jobs. I think you got to figure out jobs that will grow, jobs that will... One thing is for sure, you can't fight economic forces. And when Democrats try, I think John Edwards' protectionist campaign is doomed to failure for two reasons. First, I think it's the wrong approach. And second, I think that Joe and Eileen, they sort of like to hear protectionism, but they know in their belly it's a formula for defeat and failure and waving the white flag, and that we can't compete. So I like to say, I say in the book, and I like to tell my fellow Democrats, you can't have water flow uphill. You can have water flow down one side of the mountain rather than the other side, but you can't have it flow uphill. You can't fight economic forces. Marx was right in this one. They're paramount. And you got to figure out in Flint, Michigan, what is an industry that suits the labor force, that might have good educational institutions, that could grow, and you got to nurture it in every way. Education, luring companies, luring workers, and it can work. I've seen it work in the capital region, and now we're trying to spread it, for instance, to Rochester, which Kodak, which once had 65,000 people in Rochester, has fewer than 15 in 20 years.
Yes, absolutely.
But at the same time, it is the center of optics. How do you expand optics so that new businesses will come and grow? And it's beginning to work there too. So I would say we don't pay enough attention, and actually Larry Summers said this at a hearing we just had. We don't spend enough attention focused on some regional solutions. That a good solution for Flint might not be a good solution for Albany. In the long run, education is a key. It really is.
We have time for one last question, then I'm going to make one announcement, and let's go to you. And sorry to everyone else. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Senator, for coming here today. My name is Graham Ward. I'm a joint student at the Kennedy School and Business School. I lived the last 5 years in Harlem. My question is, well, since you graduated from law school, when you graduated from law school, you decided to not go the corporate route and go serve the people of New York and Long Island because you wanted to serve Joe and Eileen.
Right.
And then from there, you decided that Joe and Eileen of New York State were not getting served, and so you decided to run for the Senate and win that. So my question to you is that since you wrote this book, and you seem to be concerned now, really concerned about Joe and Eileen in the whole United States, if you don't run for president, and then whoever else wins, regardless if it's Democrat or Republican, wins the presidency, if they do not serve Joe and Eileen, will you feel in the way that you let Joe and Eileen down?
I didn't hear the last part.
Will you feel like you let Joe and Eileen of the U.S. down?
I'm trying my best, but yes, I think if you're going to help Joe and Eileen, you're going to help America. And I try to propose solutions where Joe and Eileen's interest and America's interest are in sync. And there are a lot of places where I disagree with Joe and Eileen, and my political success is in part because when I disagree, I explain it to them. I'm for affirmative action. They're not so sure. I'm against the anti-gay marriage amendments. They're not. But when I explain to them why I have my views, I talk to them. That's a second point, not the question you answered. I think that, you know, the other reason I wrote this book is I worry about America. I love America. I love America. I think it's a great, I really believe, no, the Founding Fathers called it God's noble experiment. Some of you will disagree, but I agree with those 3 words to this day. We still are. And I don't want to see us, well, my worry, frankly, is that 20 years from now, our economic pie will stop growing, or will grow at too small a rate, and maybe we'll fracture and become a much more sour nation than the optimistic, wonderful place we are right now. And so I wrote the book, but it's only the first step. I'm going to try to get some of these ideas implemented. I think Ari mentioned that. I'm going to try as senator, as one of the Democratic leadership, to get the ideas on energy and immigration implemented this year. I am going to beseech the presidential candidates to try and adopt them, steal them, use them, make them theirs. I'm going to do anything I can to see that these ideas predominate. As for me running for president, I'm realistic. I'm not going to run for president.
I think we've come to the end of the time here. I want to announce that the senator is going to be walking over to the Harvard Coop for a book signing.
Right.
Anybody who hasn't gotten the book can go get it there and have it signed. And on behalf of the Kennedy School and the John F. Kennedy Forum, I want to thank the senator for appearing with us today and for writing a book that gives a lot of us hope. Thank you.
Thank you.